The morning sun blazed across Maple Street like a spotlight on a stage, and Jessica Chen stood at her kitchen window with a steaming cup of coffee, watching the neighborhood slowly wake up. Her home, the renovated 1970s Craftsman with the addition she'd spent 18 months planning, felt like a sanctuary. The pool sparkled behind her, a turquoise jewel that had cost more than her first car. At 34, Jessica had earned every inch of this space. 10 years at a marketing firm, climbing the ladder while her peers quit to have kids or chase dreams. No regrets. The pool was her reward, her escape, her small piece of the American dream made real. She didn't notice the white Range Rover slowing down on the street outside. Marcus, her golden retriever, padded into the kitchen and pressed his nose against the glass door leading to the pool area. He was 3 years old, a rescue she'd adopted on impulse after a particularly brutal day at work. That impulse had been the best decision she'd made in years. Marcus didn't care about promotions or metrics or whether she'd closed the quarterly deal. He just wanted to be near her. "You want to go out, buddy?" Jessica scratched behind his ears. Marcus's tail wagged with the intensity of a metronome, set to desperate. She opened the sliding glass door and watched him bound into the backyard, his golden coat gleaming in the morning light. He made his circuit around the pool, something he did every morning, and then positioned himself on the lounger near the shallow end, the one Jessica usually claimed on weekends when she had nowhere to be. Jessica returned to her coffee and pulled up her email on her phone. 43 unread messages since last night. She scrolled through them absently, most work-related, most demanding immediate attention. She flagged the important ones and made a mental note to tackle them after her morning run. The run never happened. At 9:47 a.m., just as Jessica was about to change into her workout gear, her phone buzzed. A text from her neighbor, Carol, the woman who lived in the gray modern house directly behind hers, separated only by a privacy fence and about 15 feet of property line. "Hey Jess, question about the new solar panels your contractor mentioned. Would love to pick your brain, maybe pool day this week." Jessica smiled. Carol was one of the few neighbors she'd gotten close to. They'd bonded over a HOA dispute about fence height 3 years ago and had been friends ever since. She texted back a confirmation and set her phone down. She never registered the white Range Rover that had circled the block twice. By 10:30 a.m., Jessica had showered, answered 15 emails, and was deep in a conference call with her East Coast team when she heard it, a faint sound that didn't quite belong. A car door, maybe, or something heavier being moved. She muted her microphone and listened, but the sound didn't repeat. "Sorry, did anyone catch that last point?" she asked, unmuting. The call continued. Numbers, projections, quarterly reviews, the normal rhythm of her professional life, the one that demanded her constant attention and rewarded her amply for giving it. What she didn't hear was the gate in the back fence, the one the contractor had left unsecured 2 days ago while installing the alarm system, slowly, carefully being pushed open. Marcus was the first to notice something was wrong. He lifted his head from the lounger, his ears perking up. A scent carried on the breeze, foreign and unfamiliar. His nose twitched. Every rescue dog develops a particular sensitivity to danger, an instinct honed by survival. Marcus's came from his years on the streets before Jessica found him. His entire body went rigid. Then he heard the footsteps. They were careful, measured footsteps, the kind someone takes when they're trying not to be heard. A woman's shoes, designer heels actually, clicking softly on the pool deck. Marcus stood, his body immediately tense, but he didn't bark. Not yet. He watched as a figure emerged from behind the large oak tree that marked the border of Jessica's property. She was tall, blonde, wearing designer sunglasses despite the overcast sky, and she was carrying a large woven beach bag. She wore white linen pants and a cream silk blouse that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. Her face was familiar to Marcus only in the way that all humans' faces were familiar, potential threats until proven otherwise. The woman's eyes scanned the backyard. She saw the empty patio, the quiet house, the pool glimmering in the late morning light. She saw Marcus, and for a moment their eyes locked. What she apparently didn't see was a reason not to continue. "Good boy," she said softly, her voice dripping with the kind of artificial sweetness that trained dogs recognize as a manipulation tactic. "Just a nice swim. I won't bother you." She moved toward the pool with a sense of entitlement that radiated from her like heat waves. She set her beach bag down on one of the loungers, the one where Marcus had been lying, without asking, without hesitating, without any apparent recognition that this was someone else's home. Marcus's hackles rose. The woman didn't notice. She was already slipping off her heels, already untying the silk blouse to reveal an expensive one-piece bathing suit beneath. She had the kind of body that came from personal trainers and careful meal planning, the kind of body that looked good in designer swimwear. She didn't have the kind of sense that would prevent her from breaking into someone's pool. "Marcus," Jessica's voice carried from inside the house. The call had ended. "Marcus, come here, buddy." The woman froze. For a moment, uncertainty flickered across her face. But then she seemed to make a calculation, the kind of calculation people like her made all the time. She was already here. She'd already committed. Why waste it? She slipped into the water with barely a splash. And as her body disappeared beneath the turquoise surface, Marcus finally understood what he was supposed to do. The alarm system Jessica had installed last week, the one that monitored the pool for unauthorized entrance, specifically designed for safety but perfectly suited for this moment, had a failsafe. A motion sensor triggered by the pool gate opening combined with movement in the water, designed to alert homeowners and deter intruders. It could be activated manually, or it could be activated by a very smart dog who understood in his own way that something was deeply wrong. Marcus had watched the installer demonstrate the system to Jessica. He'd seen her input the command sequence on her phone. He didn't understand technology the way humans did, but he understood patterns and he understood danger. He walked directly to the small control panel mounted on the patio wall, the one Jessica had shown him during their backyard orientation, and pressed his nose against it. Nothing happened. He pawed at it. Still nothing. Then, with the kind of persistence that had kept him alive on the streets for 3 years before Jessica found him, he stood on his hind legs, and with his paw, he hit the red emergency button that Jessica had specifically told him never to touch. The alarm that erupted sounded like the world ending. It was a sustained, piercing wail, a sound designed to make every nerve in the human body scream. Strobe lights that had been installed around the pool perimeter burst into rhythm, flashing bright white at a pace that induced immediate disorientation. In the pool, the woman's head snapped up above the water, her face a mask of pure shock. Inside the house, Jessica's head snapped up from her laptop, every muscle in her body going tight with adrenaline. And Marcus, standing on his hind legs with his paws on the control panel, felt something he hadn't felt in years, the absolute certainty that he had done exactly the right thing. Jessica was already moving. Her fight-or-flight response was firing on all cylinders, her mind running through scenarios, burglar, medical emergency, earthquake, as she sprinted toward the patio. Marcus's urgent barking, audible even over the alarm's wail, told her everything she needed to know. Something was wrong outside, and her dog had activated the safety system. She burst through the sliding glass door into brilliant afternoon light and strobing white flashes, and that's when she saw her. The woman in the pool was flailing toward the edge, her designer sunglasses askew, her expensive hair dripping, her face contorted with a mixture of fear and fury. She was definitely trespassing. She was definitely in Jessica's pool, and she was definitely someone Jessica recognized. It took a moment for the name to attach itself to the face, but when it did, Jessica's stomach dropped. Karen Whitmore. The same Karen Whitmore who had been her supervisor's favorite for the promotion Jessica didn't get last year. The same Karen Whitmore who worked at a competing firm and had been spreading rumors about Jessica's work ethic and personal life ever since. The same Karen Whitmore who had been spotted at 3 different industry events, publicly criticizing Jessica's strategic decisions on projects she had no professional involvement in. The same Karen Whitmore who lived on the other side of the neighborhood and, as far as Jessica knew, had no legitimate reason to be in her pool at 10:45 a.m. on a Wednesday morning. Their eyes met across the water. Karen's expression shifted from panic to calculation in the space of a heartbeat. She pulled herself out of the pool with a kind of practiced grace that suggested this wasn't her first time breaking into someone's private space. And as she emerged, soaking wet and dripping, she did something that would have been almost funny if it wasn't so outrageous. She smiled. "Jessica, oh my God, I'm so glad you're home." Her voice had shifted into the upper register of false enthusiasm, the tone of voice people use when they're about to lie their way out of a situation. Your gate was open. I saw it this morning when I was jogging, and I just wanted to use the pool for a few minutes before my lunch meeting. I had no idea you were home. Jessica stared at her. Marcus barked, a sound that cut through the alarm's final wails as the system cycled down to silence. Your gate, Jessica said slowly, is always closed. It locks automatically, and you weren't jogging. You drove here in your Range Rover, which is parked on the street outside my house. Corinne's smile faltered. She stood there, dripping, makeup running, expensive bathing suit clinging to her frame, and for just a moment, Jessica could see exactly what Corinne was. A woman caught red-handed with no viable excuse. A woman whose carefully constructed facade was cracking under the weight of the truth. Then Corinne's expression hardened. "This is absurd," she said, her voice turning sharp. "I'm a neighbor who wanted to use the community facilities. There's no need to be dramatic about it. I'll just get my things and go." She reached for her blouse. Jessica didn't move. She was aware of Marcus pressed against her leg, still on alert. She was aware of her phone in her hand. She was aware, in that crystalline moment of clarity that only comes in certain confrontations, that she had a choice to make. She could let Corinne walk away, say nothing, maintain the peace. Or she could make sure that what had just happened was documented in a way that Corinne could never deny. Jessica raised her phone. The camera app was already open. Corinne's eyes went wide as she registered what was happening. "Don't you dare," she hissed, and there was something in her voice, something raw and desperate and genuinely furious, that suggested this wasn't the first time someone had caught her in an uncomfortable situation. "Jessica, I'm warning you, put the phone down." Jessica didn't lower the phone. "You broke into my home," she said quietly. "You bypassed my gate, you trespassed on my property, and you used my pool without permission, and now you're threatening me for documenting it." "I didn't break anything," Corinne snarled. "The gate was open. I walked through an open gate. There's no crime in that." "You know what?" Jessica said, and there was a kind of calm in her voice that surprised even herself. "You're right. You didn't break anything. You just assumed you were entitled to help yourself to whatever you wanted, which I'm realizing is pretty much the story of your entire relationship with my life, isn't it?" The words hung in the air between them, and for a moment, Corinne's carefully constructed mask slipped entirely. Beneath it was something raw, something that looked almost like shame, though it was gone in an instant, replaced by cold fury. "You think you're better than me?" Corinne said flatly. "You always have, but you're not. You got lucky with that job, that house, that stupid pool. You didn't earn it any more than I did. You just convinced people you were worth more." Jessica lowered her phone slightly. In that moment, she realized something crucial. Corinne wasn't just angry because she'd been caught. She was angry because the pool, the house, the life that Jessica had built, all of it represented something Corinne believed she deserved more than Jessica did. And that anger, that sense of entitlement, that conviction that the rules didn't apply to her, that was the real problem. "Get your things," Jessica said, her voice steady, "and leave now." Corinne grabbed her blouse and her designer sunglasses. She looked around for her heels, found them by the lounger, and slipped them on with a kind of defiant grace that suggested she was determined to maintain some semblance of dignity even as her entire facade was crumbling. "You'll regret this," she said as she walked toward the gate. "I doubt it," Jessica replied. But as she watched Corinne disappear through the back fence, carefully closing it behind her, as if that gesture could somehow undo what had just happened, Jessica realized that the confrontation was far from over. In fact, it had barely begun. Because Corinne Whitmore was not the kind of woman who accepted defeat quietly. And Jessica Chen had just made an enemy who had nothing left to lose. The video spread like wildfire through the industry in less than 24 hours. Jessica hadn't posted it. She'd recorded it, she'd backed it up to her cloud storage, and she'd sent a copy to the police department along with a detailed statement about the trespassing. That was supposed to be the end of it, a straightforward documentation of an unwanted intrusion handled through proper channels. But somewhere between her filing the report and the police scheduling an interview with Corinne, the video found its way to social media. Not to Jessica's accounts, to Corinne's competitors, to industry insiders, to a whistleblower forum that specialized in corporate misconduct. And then, with the inexorable momentum of viral content, it spread to Reddit, to Twitter, to TikTok, each platform amplifying the narrative in its own way. Entitled "Woman Caught Breaking into Neighbor's Pool." Karen gets exposed by alarm system. Watch as this woman's entitlement catches up with her. By Thursday morning, Jessica's phone was vibrating with notifications constantly. Messages from colleagues she hadn't spoken to in years. Texts from friends asking if she was okay. A call from her boss asking if there was a media situation she should be aware of. And then came the call that changed everything. "Ms. Chen," the woman's voice on the other end of the line was crisp, professional, and carried the unmistakable cadence of someone trained in legal negotiations. "This is Patricia Lockwood, calling on behalf of Karen Whitmore. My client would like to discuss this situation with you and reach a mutually beneficial resolution before this escalates further." Jessica had been in her home office, trying to focus on work and failing miserably. She sat back from her desk, her coffee growing cold beside her keyboard. "I'm not sure what you're talking about," Jessica said carefully, though she knew exactly what the lawyer meant. "The recording," Patricia said, her tone suggesting she was explaining something incredibly simple to someone of limited comprehension. "The one that has made my client the subject of significant public ridicule and professional scrutiny. Ms. Whitmore believes the circumstances were misrepresented, and she's prepared to discuss compensation for its removal and for your discretion going forward." Jessica's first instinct was to laugh. The idea that Karen was trying to pay her off was almost absurd. Her second instinct was anger, the kind of white-hot, righteous anger that comes from someone attempting to manipulate a situation they had created themselves. "I didn't post the video," Jessica said flatly. "But you recorded it, and you provided copies to multiple parties, including law enforcement. You enabled its distribution. And now my client is suffering significant professional and personal consequences because of your actions." There was something in Patricia's voice that made Jessica's spine stiffen. This wasn't just about the pool anymore. This was about something bigger, something more strategic. "Tell your client that if she attempts to contact me again, I'm filing a restraining order. And if she contacts me directly, I'm filing an additional complaint with the police for harassment. You should consider very carefully before escalating this situation," Patricia said, and for the first time, there was an edge of genuine menace in her voice. "My client has significant resources and significantly more patience than you might expect." Jessica hung up. She sat in her office for a long moment, listening to the quiet hum of the house around her. Marcus was asleep in his bed in the living room. The pool outside was undisturbed, a picture of serenity and peace. And somewhere in the neighborhood, Karen Whitmore was on the phone with her lawyer, strategizing about how to undo the consequences of her own actions. Jessica's phone buzzed again. Another notification, this time it was from LinkedIn. She'd been tagged in a comment on a post about the incident. She clicked through and found herself reading a carefully worded statement from someone claiming to be a former colleague of hers, alleging that Jessica had a history of boundary issues, and that the pool incident was likely a misunderstanding that had been blown out of proportion. Jessica didn't recognize the name. She clicked through to the profile and found it was fake, created 3 days ago, populated with stock photos and generic work history. A sock puppet account. Karen was creating sock puppet accounts to try to rehabilitate her image. Jessica screenshotted the evidence and filed another report with the platform. By Friday, the situation had metastasized into something considerably more complex. A local news outlet had picked up the story, not as a simple woman caught trespassing segment, but as a deeper investigation into harassment and neighborhood disputes. They'd interviewed 4 of Jessica's neighbors, 3 of whom had spoken positively about her. Carol was among them. And one, an elderly man named Robert who lived 2 doors down and had a long-standing dispute with Jessica over her addition, who had suggested that Jessica was not as innocent as she seemed. The segment presented both sides as equally valid, as balanced, as though there was genuine ambiguity about whether Karen had done something wrong. Jessica's phone rang at 6 p.m. It was Carol. "Jess, have you seen the news?" Carol's voice was urgent, worried. "I've avoided looking at it," Jessica admitted. "Don't or do, but then come over here. You need support right now, and honestly, I'm angry enough that I want to do something productive instead of just watching this unfold." 30 minutes later, Jessica was sitting at Carol's dining table with a glass of wine, watching her friend scroll through the mounting chaos on her laptop. More accounts, more comments. A subreddit had been created specifically to discuss the incident, with some users arguing that Jessica had violated Corinne's privacy, that the alarm system was unnecessarily aggressive, that the whole thing was a situation where both parties bore responsibility. "This is insane," Carol said, shaking her head. "You have video evidence, you have a police report. What more do people need?" "Apparently a narrative that's more sympathetic to Corinne," Jessica said bitterly. "She's wealthy, she's attractive, and she's presenting herself as the victim of an overzealous neighbor. That sells better than entitled woman trespasses and gets caught." "So what do you do?" Carol leaned back in her chair. "I don't know. My lawyer said to stay quiet, not to engage with the narrative, and to let the police investigation proceed. But sitting quiet while Corinne's team creates fake accounts and spreads misinformation feels like letting her win," Carol finished. Jessica nodded. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of the situation settling over them. Then Carol's phone buzzed. She checked it, and her expression shifted from concerned to furious in an instant. "Oh no, 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 no." "What?" Carol turned her phone to face Jessica. "Corinne just posted a story on Instagram." The image showed Corinne with red eyes like she'd been crying. The caption was a masterclass in gaslighting. "I've been silent while lies about me spread online, but I need to tell my truth. What happened on Wednesday was an incident of confusion and poor communication. I briefly used a neighbor's pool, unaware that she wasn't home. Instead of a simple conversation, it escalated into a situation where I've been publicly humiliated and my character has been attacked. I've done nothing illegal. I've done nothing wrong, but I have been hurt. And I need people to know that there are consequences to false accusations. Be kind, only side matters, let me live." Jessica stared at the image in disbelief. "Did she just—" "Yes," Carol said grimly. "She just flipped the entire narrative. She's positioning herself as the victim of a false accusation campaign." Jessica's phone rang. It was her boss. "Jess, I need you to tell me what's going on here." Margaret's voice was tight, controlled, the tone of someone managing a crisis. "I've got Corinne Whitmore's lawyer contacting our HR department claiming that you've orchestrated a campaign against her. I've got social media pushing this narrative. And I've got investors asking questions about whether any of our team members have judgment issues. I need to know exactly what happened and exactly how you want to handle this." Jessica took a breath and explained methodically and carefully every detail of the incident. The gate that Corinne had forced open, the algorithm that had caught her, the video that Jessica hadn't distributed, the lawyer's threats, the fake accounts. Margaret listened without interrupting. When Jessica finished, her boss was quiet for a long moment. "I believe you," Margaret said finally. "But belief isn't going to be enough anymore. This is a public relations situation now, and it's bigger than you and Corinne and your neighborhood dispute. We need to get ahead of this narrative before it damages the company." "What does that mean?" "It means I'm going to recommend that we issue a statement supporting you while making clear that this is a personal matter and not a reflection of our company's values or your professional work. And if people don't believe that, then we manage the fallout and we document everything so that when this goes to court, and Jessica, I'm telling you now, this absolutely is going to court, we have a clear record of where the company stood." After the call ended, Jessica sat with the weight of what had just happened. This wasn't about the pool anymore. This wasn't about a simple trespassing incident. This was about Corinne's reputation versus hers, played out on a very public stage, and the outcome was going to determine not just how their neighbors saw them, but potentially how the entire industry saw them. Jessica went home to find Marcus waiting by the door, his entire body expressing the kind of concern dogs have for their humans when they sense distress. She sat on the floor and held him close, burying her face in his fur while he licked her hair with single-minded determination. "We did the right thing," she whispered to him. "You did the right thing, buddy. I just don't think right things are going to matter for a while." Marcus pressed his nose against hers, his eyes dark and understanding. By Saturday morning, the narrative had shifted again. A blogger who specialized in analyzing online harassment campaigns had published a detailed breakdown of the fake accounts Corinne's team had created. The analysis included IP addresses, account creation patterns, and clear evidence of a coordinated disinformation campaign. The post went viral within hours, and suddenly the conversation wasn't about whether Karen had trespassed. It was about the lengths she was willing to go to in order to control the narrative. But instead of Karen's reputation collapsing, something more complicated happened. Half the internet doubled down on supporting her, claiming that the IP analysis was fake, that Jessica had orchestrated it, that this was all an elaborate plot to destroy an innocent woman. The other half used Karen's actions as evidence of everything wrong with women in corporate America, with privilege, with the erosion of social accountability. Karen had become a Rorschach test, and everyone was seeing their own fears and biases reflected in her. Jessica stopped checking social media on Sunday. She stopped reading the news. She focused on work, on Marcus, on the simple act of existing in her home without constantly monitoring what people were saying about her. And then on Monday morning, everything changed. The police called, not with information about the trespassing case, but with a different kind of problem. Karen had filed a counter-complaint, alleging that the alarm system Jessica had activated was dangerous, that it had caused her anxiety attack and potential hearing damage, and that Jessica had deliberately triggered it knowing Karen was in the pool. The case was no longer straightforward. It had become a legitimate legal dispute, with two sides making competing claims about responsibility, intent, and harm. And somewhere in that legal gray area, surrounded by lawyers and media narratives and social media chaos, the simple truth of what had happened was becoming increasingly difficult to see. Over the next 2 weeks, she filed 3 more reports, one with the City Planning Board alleging that Jessica's pool installation had violated setback requirements, one with the county assessor claiming that Jessica had underreported the pool's value on her taxes, and one with the Homeowners Association claiming that the alarm system violated noise ordinances. None of them had merit, all of them required investigation. Jessica's lawyer, Susan Chen, no relation, worked methodically through each complaint, gathering documentation, filing responses, and building a clear record of Karen's pattern of harassment. But the process was exhausting, expensive, and time-consuming in a way that was designed to be exactly that. "She's trying to bury you in process," Susan explained during their 3rd meeting. "Not because any of these complaints are valid, but because the cost of defending against them, financial, emotional, temporal, is designed to break you down. It's a tactic." "It's working," Jessica said flatly. She'd been having trouble sleeping. Work was suffering because she couldn't focus. Even her time with Marcus felt like a performance, an attempt to keep things normal while her life was being systematically dismantled by legal filings and social media campaigns. "The good news," Susan continued, "is that we have evidence of the pattern. Every one of these complaints is filed within days of negative media coverage about Karen or positive coverage about you. It's reactive, vengeful, and it creates a clear picture for a court of systematic harassment. What's the bad news? The bad news is that Karen is rich enough to sustain this indefinitely, and the legal system isn't designed to punish frivolous complaints quickly enough to stop them from doing damage in the meantime." Jessica stared out the window of Susan's office, watching the city move below them with its usual indifference to her crisis. "I want to countersue," she said. Susan was quiet for a moment. "That's an option, but I want you to understand what that entails. We'd be filing a lawsuit against Karen for harassment, potentially for defamation, certainly for the frivolous complaints. We'd be looking at 6 to 18 months of litigation, discovery, depositions, all of it public. And we'd be spending somewhere in the range of $30,000 to $50,000, maybe more, to get to a resolution. And if we win, we potentially recover our legal fees and we get a court order preventing her from further contact. We might get damages for emotional distress. But here's the thing, Jessica, winning in court doesn't change the narrative online. It doesn't undo the fake accounts. It doesn't erase the people who have decided that Karen is the victim in all of this." Jessica absorbed this. "So either way, I lose." "Either way, you have to be prepared to lose something," Susan said gently. "The question is what you're willing to lose in order to win the thing that actually matters. Which is your life back, your peace, your ability to not wake up at 3 a.m. worrying about whatever Karen's lawyer is going to file next." That night, Jessica sat at her kitchen table with her laptop open, scrolling through the subreddit dedicated to the incident. The original post had been shared over 200,000 times. The thread had 15,000 comments. People who'd never met her, never met Karen, who had no real knowledge of the situation beyond what they'd seen in a 2-minute video clip, were making elaborate arguments about who was right and who was wrong. One comment caught her attention. "Honestly, both of them are toxic, rich people problems. Why are we supposed to care? There's real suffering in the world." It had 3,000 upvotes. Jessica realized something in that moment. The incident had been transformed into entertainment. Regardless of what the truth was, what actually mattered was that it was compelling, and compelling meant engagement. And engagement meant that everyone who had a stake in the narrative, Karen and her team, the media outlets covering it, the platforms distributing it, had a financial incentive to keep it going. She could lose or she could lose. There was no winning the narrative game when the game itself was the problem. But she could still win in court. The next morning, Jessica called Susan back. "File the lawsuit," she said. "Let's end this." Susan's office moved quickly. The complaint was filed Thursday, and by Friday, Karen's lawyer had responded with a motion to dismiss based on the argument that Karen's actions were protected speech. The legal theater had officially begun. What Jessica didn't know was that Karen had already made her own calculation about the stakes of this lawsuit. She couldn't win it, not really. The facts were too clear, Jessica's documentation too thorough, but she could use the lawsuit itself as a weapon in a different way. She called a journalist she knew at a major publication and offered an exclusive interview. She talked about mental health, about stress, about how the incident had triggered a past trauma she'd never spoken about publicly, about anxiety and privilege and the predatory culture of competitive corporate America. And she positioned herself, very carefully, as a symbol of a larger problem. Women in her position being held to impossible standards while being demonized by others equally privileged, but with access to better PR. The article, when it was published, was a masterpiece of manipulation. The headline read, "Behind the Pool, How One Woman's Mental Health Crisis Became a Public Crucifixion." The photo was of Karen, vulnerable, tears in her eyes, looking directly at the camera with an expression of such raw pain that it was hard to reconcile it with the woman who'd broken into Jessica's pool. The article didn't deny the trespassing. It contextualized it. Karen had been having a breakdown, she explained to the journalist. She'd been struggling with depression and anxiety. The incident at the pool was a moment of poor judgment during a difficult time, and instead of receiving compassion, she'd been publicly shamed, professionally sabotaged, and turned into a cautionary tale about female ambition. The article made no mention of the fake accounts, no mention of the frivolous complaints, no mention of the lawyer's threats. It presented a version of the truth that was almost true, which made it infinitely more dangerous than an outright lie. Jessica saw the article on her lunch break, when Carol texted her the link with a series of furious emojis. She read it in her car, in the parking garage of her office building, and when she got to the part where Karen discussed her trauma from the incident, Jessica had to physically stop herself from screaming. The injustice of it was suffocating. Karen had orchestrated this entire disaster. Karen had created fake accounts and filed frivolous complaints and hired a lawyer to threaten her. And now Karen was being presented as the victim of Jessica's cruelty. Jessica called Susan. "This is defamation," she said, not bothering with a greeting. "That article is full of lies." "It's more complicated than that," Susan said, her voice careful. "Some of it is opinion. Some of it is Karen's account of her own experiences, which can't be false by definition. Some of it is arguable. An actual defamation case would be difficult to prove and potentially costly. So she just gets away with it." "No," Susan said, "but maybe not through the courts, maybe through other means." "What does that mean?" "It means we file the lawsuit, we proceed with the litigation, and we let the discovery process do the work. When we get Karen's communications, her emails, her text messages, her calendar, when we force her to answer questions under oath about the fake accounts and the coordinated campaign, when all of that becomes part of the public record in a lawsuit, then the narrative changes. Not because we've convinced people in a narrative war, but because the facts become undeniable." Jessica understood what Susan was saying. It would take time, months, maybe years, but eventually the truth would come out in a context where it was harder to manipulate or reframe. How long? Jessica asked. Discovery usually takes 4 to 6 months. Then we're looking at depositions, motions, potentially settlement negotiations. If it goes to trial, add another 6 months to a year. Jessica did the math in her head. By next summer, this might finally be resolved. For now, she'd have to live in this liminal space where she was simultaneously the victim and the villain, depending on which version of the story people believed. She returned to her office and tried to focus on work, tried to respond to emails, tried to pretend that everything was normal. But that night, when she went home, she found something waiting for her that changed the entire nature of the situation. A letter had been left on her porch, handwritten in elegant script on expensive stationery. Jessica, it began, I know this has been difficult, for both of us. I never wanted things to escalate like this. The truth is, I was going through something when I went to your pool, something I couldn't talk about, something that made me do things I normally would never do. I understand that you felt violated. I understand that you had every right to protect your space. But I'm asking you, as one woman to another, to consider whether legal warfare is really the answer here. What if we could find a different path? What if you could help me instead of punishing me? I'm reaching out in good faith to ask if we could talk. Just talk, face to face. Maybe the two of us could find a way forward that doesn't involve destroying each other. If you're willing, I'll be at the coffee shop on Maple Street on Saturday at 2 p.m. I'm hoping you'll come. Sincerely, Karen. Jessica read the letter 3 times. Each reading confirmed what she already knew. This was another manipulation. Another tactic. This was Karen trying to get in front of the lawsuit with a settlement offer wrapped in the language of reconciliation and vulnerability. But there was something else in the letter, too, something that made Jessica's chest tighten. What if Karen was telling the truth? What if there was a genuine human being underneath all of this? Someone who was struggling and who had made terrible choices, but who was genuinely trying to find a way out? What if, by proceeding with the lawsuit, Jessica was the one being cruel? These were the kinds of questions that Karen's team had calculated would occur to someone like Jessica, someone with a conscience, someone who believed in compassion, someone who wanted to see the best in people. These were the kinds of questions designed to make Jessica doubt herself at exactly the moment when doubt was the most dangerous. Jessica folded the letter and put it on her kitchen table. She didn't show it to Susan. She didn't mention it to Carol. She sat alone in her home with Marcus resting his head on her lap, and she wrestled with the question that Karen's letter had planted in her mind. Was she doing the right thing, or was she becoming the villain in her own story? She would have the answer by Saturday afternoon. Saturday arrived with gray skies and the threat of rain. Jessica had spent the entire week in a state of suspension, unable to fully commit to going to the meeting and unable to convince herself not to go. She'd told no one except Marcus. The coffee shop on Maple Street was called The Daily Grind, a place Jessica passed frequently but had never actually entered. It had the aesthetic of establishment, exposed brick, locally sourced this and that, a chalkboard menu that changed daily. The kind of place where people came to be seen as much as to drink coffee. Karen was already there when Jessica arrived at 1:58 p.m. She was sitting at a corner table, away from the window, in the kind of deliberate privacy that suggested she'd chosen the location carefully. She wore no makeup, which was shocking given how polished Jessica had always seen her. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail. She wore jeans and a sweater, the kind of deliberately casual outfit that took significant effort to assemble correctly. She looked vulnerable, and that was precisely the problem. "Thank you for coming," Karen said as Jessica sat across from her. Her eyes were red-rimmed, as though she'd been crying. Whether she had actually been crying or was simply very good at appearing to have been was a question Jessica could no longer answer with any certainty. "I'm not sure why I came," Jessica said flatly. She decided on the drive over that she wasn't going to engage in pleasantries, that she was going to listen, but she wasn't going to pretend that listening meant forgiveness. "I need to explain some things," Karen said. "Things that don't excuse what I did, but that explain it, and I think you deserve to know them." Jessica said nothing. She gestured for Karen to continue. Karen took a deep breath. "6 months ago, I was passed over for a promotion that I believed I was entitled to. My company gave the position to someone younger, less experienced, but better at office politics. I was angry. I was humiliated. And then I started noticing you, probably because I was looking for someone to blame, and I realized that you were having success that I was convinced I should have had instead. So you hate me because of corporate competition, Jessica said. Got it. No, Karen said sharply. Let me finish. Around the same time, my marriage was falling apart. My husband and I had been struggling for years, but I'd convinced myself that if I could just get that promotion, if I could just achieve enough, then everything would be okay. I was putting all my emotional energy into work as a substitute for dealing with the fact that my relationship was fundamentally broken. Karen paused, taking a sip of her coffee. Her hands were shaking slightly. Whether from genuine emotion or excellent performance, Jessica couldn't determine. When I got passed over for the promotion, something broke inside me. I started drinking more than I should. I wasn't sleeping well. I was obsessing over people like you, people who seemed to have everything figured out. And then I found myself at your house, looking at your pool and thinking about how unfair it was that you had this beautiful life and I was drowning. So breaking into my pool was your therapy. Jessica's voice was cold. Breaking into your pool was me having a moment of complete disconnect from reality, Karen said. It was me at my lowest point making a decision that I can't undo. And then when I got caught, instead of accepting responsibility, I doubled down. I got a lawyer. I tried to fix it through manipulation instead of admission, and I made everything infinitely worse. Karen's eyes met Jessica's, and there was something in them that looked like genuine remorse. But Jessica had spent the last 2 weeks being lied to by carefully constructed narratives. She'd learned that sincerity could be performed, that vulnerability could be weaponized. I don't believe you, Jessica said simply. Karen flinched. I understand why you'd say that, but Jessica, I'm telling you the truth now. My marriage is ending. I'm in therapy. I've been diagnosed with depression and anxiety, and I'm on medication for the first time in my life. The incident at your pool was the catalyst that made me actually face how sick I'd become. And the fake accounts, and the frivolous complaints, were those part of your journey to mental health? No, Karen said, and something in her voice shifted. The vulnerability was still there, but underneath it was a hardness that suggested she was finally being honest about something. Those were my lawyer's idea. She told me that if I didn't fight back, if I didn't establish a counter-narrative, I'd lose. She told me that the lawsuit would destroy me if I didn't get ahead of it, so I let her do it. I let myself be led by someone whose job is to win, not to find truth. Your lawyer told you to create fake accounts. No, not explicitly. But I understood what she meant when she talked about establishing a broader narrative, about ensuring that my side of the story was heard. I made the choice to take her suggestions as far as they could go. Jessica absorbed this. It was a carefully constructed confession that took responsibility while also distributing it to other parties. The lawyer, the depression, the marriage, everything except the fundamental decision to be the kind of person who would break into someone's pool, get caught, and then spend weeks creating propaganda. I'm withdrawing the counter-complaints, Karen continued. I'm calling my lawyer tomorrow and telling her to drop the motion to dismiss. I'm going to settle this case however you want to settle it. I just want it to be over. And I want you to know that none of this was about you. It was all about me trying to destroy my own reflection. Jessica listened to this and felt something shift in her chest. Not forgiveness. Not quite. But a recognition that she was dealing with an actual human being, one who was flawed and struggling and capable of remarkable cruelty, but also capable of something that looked like genuine remorse. The question was whether that capacity for remorse was real, or another layer of manipulation. Why are you telling me this? Jessica asked. Because I need you to know that I'm not fighting you anymore. You've won. You caught me. You exposed me. You filed the lawsuit. You can absolutely proceed with it, and you'll win, and it will probably destroy my career and possibly my freedom depending on what the investigation finds. But you could also choose to let me walk away, learn from this, and rebuild my life. And I'm asking you to make that choice because I don't think I can survive if you don't. There it was, the moment where everything balanced on the edge of Jessica's decision. Karen reached across the table and placed a document on it. That's a settlement agreement that my lawyer wrote. It includes a full admission of guilt, a commitment to pay for any damages you've sustained, and a permanent restraining order preventing me from contacting you. It also includes provisions where I'll publicly recant the narrative I've pushed online and admit to orchestrating a disinformation campaign. Sign it today, and by Monday, I'll start undoing the damage I've done. Jessica looked at the document but didn't open it. You're telling me you'll voluntarily admit to all of this? You'll destroy your own reputation to undo what you've done to me." "Yes," Karen said simply, "because I'd rather have a destroyed reputation and a chance at recovery than win a lawsuit and know that I did it through manipulation." The rain that had been threatening all day finally started, tapping gently against the coffee shop windows. Jessica watched it for a moment, nodding the way it distorted the view of the street outside, the way it made everything slightly less clear, slightly less certain. "I need to think about this," Jessica said. "I know, but Jessica, whatever you decide, I want you to know that I'm sorry. Not sorry because I got caught. Not sorry because I'm facing legal consequences. But genuinely, deeply sorry for the person I became and the damage I caused. If your answer is no, if you want to proceed with the lawsuit, I understand. I just wanted you to hear this first." Jessica stood. She placed the settlement agreement in her purse without reading it and walked out of the coffee shop into the rain. She drove home slowly, turning over every word of the conversation in her mind, analyzing it for truth and deception in equal measure. By the time she pulled into her driveway, she had developed a kind of framework for understanding what had happened. Karen had either A. had a genuine change of heart and was offering Jessica an opportunity for resolution and peace, or B. had recognized that the lawsuit was unwinnable and was using another manipulation tactic, the confession narrative, to try to get Jessica to lower her guard and accept a settlement that would prevent the full truth from emerging in discovery. The evidence could support both interpretations. And that was the real problem. Jessica had been lied to so thoroughly for so long that she could no longer trust her own instincts about what was true. She went to her home office and called Susan. "Don't make any decisions tonight," Susan advised when Jessica explained the meeting. "Sleep on it, read the settlement agreement tomorrow, and then we'll talk about your options." But sleep didn't come. Jessica sat in her living room until 3 a.m., with Marcus pressed against her side, wrestling with the knowledge that she had the power to end this, right now, today. But that ending, it required her to either trust Karen or to destroy her through the legal system. Both options felt impossible. And then at 3:47 a.m., Jessica received a text message from an unknown number. "Hello, Jessica. This is Agent Morrison with the FBI. We're investigating Karen Whitmore on a variety of charges related to coordinated online harassment and potential identity fraud. We understand you've been a target of some of her activity. Would you be available for an interview on Monday morning?" Jessica stared at the message for a long moment. Apparently, someone else had already made a decision for her. The lawsuit wasn't going to be the thing that resolved this situation. The FBI was. And somewhere between the decision she was trying to make and the one the federal government was about to make for her, the entire nature of the situation transformed from a civil dispute into a criminal investigation. Which meant that Karen's vulnerability at the coffee shop, her confession, her offer of settlement, all of it might have been crafted with the knowledge that an FBI investigation was coming. It was the most Karen Whitmore move possible, getting ahead of federal charges by appearing to take responsibility to a sympathetic private citizen before the government forced her to take responsibility in a much more public, much more damaging way. Jessica looked at Marcus, who was watching her with the kind of concern dogs develop for their humans when those humans are destroying themselves with worry. "We're not out of this yet, buddy," she whispered. The FBI investigation into Karen Whitmore's coordinated online harassment campaign was extensive, methodical, and absolutely devastating. Agent Morrison and her team had been monitoring Karen's digital footprint for 3 weeks before reaching out to Jessica. What they discovered was a comprehensive disinformation operation that extended far beyond the fake accounts. It included purchased bot networks, coordinated hashtag campaigns, and direct payments to several bloggers to write pieces supporting Karen's narrative. The evidence was irrefutable. The IP addresses matched. The payment records connected directly to Karen's accounts. The communications between Karen and her various contractors were all documented in meticulous detail. By Wednesday of that week, Karen's house was being searched by federal agents. By Friday, she'd been arrested and booked on multiple charges related to harassment, identity fraud, and conspiracy. The news broke online almost immediately, and the internet's pendulum swung violently in the opposite direction. Karen exposed. Woman behind pool incident arrested for conspiracy. From victim to perpetrator, the unraveling of Karen Whitmore's lies. FBI launches major investigation into coordinated harassment campaign. The articles that had painted Karen as sympathetic were updated with new information. The Reddit threads transformed overnight. The tone shifted from "both sides have a point" to "how could anyone have believed her?" And Jessica, who had been cast as the aggressor just days before, found herself suddenly rehabilitated in the public narrative. But the strange thing about vindication in the social media age is that it feels a lot like defeat. Jessica sat in her home office, scrolling through the endless content being generated about the Karen Whitmore story, and felt nothing. Not triumph, not satisfaction, just an overwhelming exhaustion and a kind of hollow recognition that the truth didn't matter as much as the momentum of the story. Carol came over on Saturday and found Jessica in exactly the same position she'd been in on Friday, staring at her screen, not really seeing it. "Come on," Carol said, gently closing the laptop. "You need to stop reading about yourself online. It's not healthy." "I'm not reading about myself," Jessica said. "I'm reading about her, how her career is ruined, how her marriage just filed for divorce, how her own parents are issuing statements distancing themselves from her actions." "And that makes you feel better?" Jessica thought about this carefully. "No, it makes me feel complicit. She destroyed herself, and now the entire internet is taking its turn piling on. And I'm part of that pile now because I have the victim's story, and victim's stories sell." "You didn't choose that," Carol said gently. "That's just what happened. I chose to record the video. I chose to give it to the police. I chose to move forward with the lawsuit instead of letting it go. Every choice led here." "What would you have done differently?" Jessica didn't have an answer. The FBI's case against Karen proceeded rapidly. She was offered a plea deal, cooperate fully with the investigation, provide testimony against the bloggers and bot network operators she'd paid to assist in the harassment campaign, and potentially face reduced sentencing. Karen accepted immediately. Within 2 weeks, she'd implicated 17 separate individuals involved in the coordinated campaign. The FBI expanded its investigation. Subpoenas were issued. What had started as a harassment investigation became a much larger look at for-hire disinformation operations. And somewhere in the middle of all of that, Karen's lawyer called Susan. "My client wishes to withdraw her counter-complaints and settle the civil case," Patricia said, her voice carrying the tone of someone managing the final aftermath of a disaster. "She's prepared to offer significant monetary damages, a full public apology, and acceptance of a permanent restraining order." The settlement was finalized within a week. The dollar amount was substantial enough that Jessica could have taken a month off work without financial strain. The apology Karen issued was public, comprehensive, and perhaps most importantly, was done under the penalty of perjury as part of the settlement agreement, which meant that any attempt to recant it would constitute additional criminal charges. Jessica received $200,000. The money felt like blood money. She didn't touch it, she didn't deposit it. She called her accountant and asked him to put it into a trust account, held but not spent, while she tried to figure out what it meant. "You earned it," her accountant said practically. "She violated you, she harassed you, you're entitled to compensation for your suffering." "The money doesn't fix the suffering," Jessica said. "It just makes me realize that suffering is now something that can be quantified and purchased away." By June, the criminal case against Karen went to trial. Jessica was called to testify about the incident, about the subsequent harassment, about the emotional toll the entire situation had taken. She walked through the details methodically, answering Patricia's aggressive cross-examination questions with careful precision. Karen sat at the defense table and didn't look at her. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. They convicted Karen on 7 of the 9 counts. The 2 acquittals were on charges where the evidence was slightly less clear, where a jury of reasonable people could interpret the facts differently. Karen was sentenced to 8 months in federal prison, to begin after the appeals process was exhausted. She was also ordered to pay restitution to Jessica and to 3 other women who had been targets of her harassment campaigns. At the conclusion of the trial, Jessica exited the courthouse to find herself surrounded by media. Questions were shouted at her from all directions. How did she feel about the verdict? What would she say to Karen now? Was she satisfied with justice? Jessica said nothing. She kept walking, protected by Susan on one side and a victim advocate on the other, until she reached her car. It wasn't until she was driving home that she realized something that would trouble her for months. She hadn't actually looked at Karen during any part of the trial. She'd looked at the jury, at the judge, at the evidence being presented, but not at Karen. Because once she really looked at Karen, not as a symbol or an abstraction or a villain in a narrative, but as an actual human being serving prison time, she'd have to confront the reality that this wasn't a story with a satisfying ending. This was just suffering, distributed across multiple people in slightly different proportions. During that time, Jessica's life slowly returned to a semblance of normal. She returned to work. The project that had been stalled during the crisis was completed successfully. She was given a promotion, one that she initially rejected before Susan pointed out that refusing to advance because Karen was in prison was letting Karen control her life from behind bars. She accepted the promotion. Marcus continued to thrive. He'd become something of a local celebrity, the dog who'd activated the alarm system. A local animal shelter had asked to use his story in their fundraising materials. A dog trainer had reached out wanting to feature him in a video about rescue dogs' protective instincts. Jessica declined all of these opportunities. She didn't want Marcus's life to be defined by this situation any more than she wanted her own to be. The $200,000 remained untouched in the trust account. Carol had suggested several times that Jessica should do something with it, donate it to charity, use it to travel, invest it in a business venture. But every time Jessica considered spending it, she felt that same sense of unease. The money was tainted because it represented a transformation of suffering into commodity. And then, on a Tuesday afternoon in February, Jessica received a letter. Her name was on the envelope, handwritten in small, careful letters. It was from Karen. She'd been released from prison 3 months earlier on her sentence, and her appeals had been exhausted. She was back in her home, on probation, serving the remainder of her sentence through community service. The letter was written on plain paper, not the fancy stationery she'd used before. Jessica, I've started this letter 17 times. Every time, I get to a certain point and realize that there's nothing I can say that would be adequate to what I've done. So I'm going to try once more, and I'm just going to say what I need to say without trying to make it eloquent or right or anything other than true. I was a bad person, not a person who made bad choices while being generally good, but a fundamentally bad person. I hurt people, I hurt you. I destroyed a part of your life that you can't get back. The months of anxiety and stress and fear, they're gone now, but they happened and I caused them. Prison didn't make me into a good person. I'm not going to tell you that I'm reformed. I'm not going to tell you that I've found some deep spiritual meaning. I'm going to tell you that I've had time to sit with who I am, and that who I am is someone who is capable of extraordinary cruelty when I feel threatened. The last time I saw you was during the trial. You never looked at me. I realized that day that part of what I'd been seeking throughout this entire situation was your attention, even negative attention. I wanted you to see me, to acknowledge me, to understand that I mattered enough to destroy. And you refusing to look at me during the trial was maybe the most accurate reflection of reality possible. I don't matter enough to you to warrant that attention. That's been a humbling realization. I'm writing to tell you that I'm sorry, not because the law required it, not because it will help my case or my reputation, but because it's true and because I think you deserve to hear it from me directly, even though you probably don't want to hear anything from me at all. I'm also writing to tell you that I'm not going to contact you again. I know there's a restraining order, but even beyond that, I'm choosing not to. You don't owe me forgiveness. You don't owe me acceptance. You don't owe me anything. And the most respectful thing I can do with the damage I've caused is to accept that and withdraw. I heard that you didn't spend the settlement money. I understand why. I also want to tell you that spending it or donating it or burning it won't fix what happened. The money was just my way of trying to quantify something that can't be quantified. You can't fix moral damage with dollars. But if you were willing, there's something I'd like to ask. There's a women's shelter that helped me when I was at my lowest. They took me in when I had nowhere else to go. They gave me therapy and structure and a chance to rebuild. The money I received through various legal settlements, my lawyer's contingency fees, payouts from the bot network operators I testified against comes to about $150,000. I'd like to donate that to the shelter. And if you'd be willing to give your $200,000 to them as well, that would create an endowment that could help other women like me, people who are broken and don't know how to fix it. I'm not expecting you to say yes. I'm just laying it out as a possibility. One more thing, thank you for not destroying me more than was necessary. You could have. During the trial, you could have exaggerated, dramatized, performed your pain for the jury. You didn't. You told the truth plainly and let it speak for itself. That act of restraint saved me from a longer sentence. It also probably saved you from becoming the kind of person who would celebrate another person's suffering. I'm sorry, Jessica, I mean that. Karen. Jessica read the letter 3 times. She sat in her home office with Marcus sleeping in the corner and read every word carefully. And then she did something she hadn't done since the incident at the pool. She cried. Not angry tears, not frustrated tears, but the kind of tears that come when you're forced to recognize the complexity of a situation you'd been trying to simplify. She called Susan. Is there any legal issue with me donating the settlement money to a charity that Karen's also donating to? Jessica asked. Susan laughed, a short, surprised sound. No, there's no legal issue, but Jessica, are you sure that money was yours? You earned it. I know, Jessica said, but I think Karen's right. I don't want to spend it. I don't want it sitting in an account as a reminder of what happened, but I do want it to mean something. 3 weeks later, Jessica visited the women's shelter that Karen had mentioned. It was a modest building in a nondescript part of the city, one that you could drive past 100 times and never notice. The director, a woman named Ruth, took her on a tour. The shelter housed about 30 women at any given time, women whose lives had fallen apart for various reasons. Some were recovering from abuse. Some had substance dependencies. Some had lost custody of children and were trying to rebuild from zero. Karen had been one of them, briefly. She came to us after her arrest, Ruth explained. She was in a state of complete breakdown. Her marriage was over. Her career was destroyed. Her entire identity had collapsed. We gave her a place to sleep, meals, therapy, and the kind of structure that helped her start to rebuild. Did it work? Jessica asked. Well, she's no longer in crisis. She has a job now, entry-level, nothing like what she had before. She's living in a small apartment. She's starting therapy and actually engaging with it. I'd say it's a work in progress, but yes, it's working. Jessica nodded. Are you Karen's? I mean, are you related to? No, Jessica said. I'm the person she victimized, but I think she's right that the money we both lost through this situation could do some good here. Ruth didn't ask any questions after that. She just nodded and continued the tour. By the end of the visit, Jessica had made a decision. She would donate the $200,000 to the shelter, with the stipulation that it be used to expand their services. She would do this publicly, and she would do it in a way that acknowledged both her suffering and Karen's attempt at redemption. When she told Carol about the decision, her friend stared at her in disbelief. You're giving the woman who destroyed your life $200,000. I'm giving money to a shelter that helped a woman rebuild her life after she destroyed mine, Jessica corrected. It's not the same thing. Isn't it? No, Jessica said. Because the money wasn't fixing anything anyway. Holding on to it was just keeping me connected to what happened. This way, I disconnect from it, and the money does something that matters. The public announcement of the donation was made jointly by Jessica and the shelter, without Karen's name mentioned. The media immediately speculated about whether Jessica had contacted Karen, whether they'd reached some kind of reconciliation, whether this was evidence that Jessica was the bigger person in the situation. Jessica declined all interview requests. A year after the trial ended, Jessica was driving through the neighborhood on a Saturday morning when she saw Karen. She was walking down Maple Street with a man, presumably someone she was dating, carrying a bag of groceries from the market. For a moment, their eyes met through the car window. Karen immediately looked away and kept walking, giving Jessica a clear signal that she understood the terms of their non-relationship. They would inhabit the same neighborhood, they would see each other occasionally, but they would not engage. Jessica could respect that. That afternoon, she received a text from an unknown number. I saw you in the car this morning. I just want to confirm that I still intend to honor the no-contact agreement. I know my letter was already a violation of the spirit of it, if not the legal terms. I'll make sure there are no further violations. K. Jessica read the message and deleted it without responding. She thought about writing something back, some acknowledgement that she understood, some indication of how she felt about the entire situation now that time had passed. But there was nothing to say that wouldn't either reopen a wound or establish a connection that neither of them needed. So she didn't respond. Instead, she took Marcus for a walk around the neighborhood, the same neighborhood where she'd lived for years, where Karen lived now under the weight of her own consequences, where Carol lived and had been her friend through the worst of it, where other neighbors had picked sides and made judgments and ultimately moved on with their lives. The pool sparkled in the afternoon sun as they walked past her house. It was just water, just chlorine and filtration systems and the accumulated expectation of leisure. It wasn't sacred space anymore. It was just a pool. That night, Jessica sat at her computer and pulled up the email she'd been meaning to send for months. To Karen Whitmore. Subject, no subject line. I'm donating the settlement money to the shelter. I'm doing it because you were right, money can't fix what happened, but it can prevent it from happening to someone else. I hope you find whatever peace is available to someone in your situation, and I hope my moving on with my life is enough proof that you didn't win even though you did damage me. You didn't fundamentally change who I am, you just changed what happened to me. There's a difference. J. She read the email 3 times. Then she closed the browser without sending it. There was no point. Karen was trying to extract herself from Jessica's life. Jessica needed to let her do that. Instead, she called Carol and made plans to get dinner. She responded to work emails and scheduled a meeting with her new team. She took Marcus to the dog park and watched him play with other dogs, completely unburdened by the weight of the previous year. And slowly, gradually, the incident at the pool became just another story that had happened to her, rather than the defining narrative of her life. It still existed, she still carried it with her, but it didn't own her anymore. That, in the end, was the only real victory anyone had earned, the ability to move on.